Hi, I'm the woman he left behind. While I lay in bed, bleeding, shaking, begging for help, he zipped his suitcase. Our 7-year-old sons watched him step over my body to leave, to live with her. And when my oldest cried out, "I'll never forgive you," he laughed, then kicked over their dinner and slammed the door. It's been 15 years. He just came back. But not for us. He came back because he needed something. So tell me, what would you do if the man who left you to die suddenly wanted back into the life he destroyed? Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this? And where? Drop a comment. I want to hear from you. The kitchen clock ticked softly above the sink, barely audible over the low hum of the refrigerator. The boys had gone to bed an hour ago. I was standing at the counter, scraping the last bits of dinner into the trash, moving slow, deliberate. The house smelled like meatloaf and pine sol. I liked that. It meant things were clean, done, in order. I wiped down the counter, rinsed the sponge, folded the dish towel the way I always did, edges lined up, crease sharp. This was the part of the day I knew best. Quiet. Predictable. I didn't have to say much, just move from task to task like clockwork. It kept things from sliding off the rails. Behind me, Tom sat in the recliner, legs stretched out, remote resting on his belly. He didn't look up. The volume on the TV was low, but I could still hear some late-night rerun of a crime show. Muffled screams, canned gunshots, the sound of a door getting kicked in. He hadn't spoken since dinner. That wasn't unusual. We didn't fight, not really. That would have been too loud, too messy. Tom just checked out. He'd been doing it more often lately. His eyes drifted past me when I talked. He started replying with one-word answers. Or worse, just a nod. A shrug. Silence. I used to ask him what was wrong. But that always turned into some version of, "What are you talking about?" Or, "You're reading into things." I got tired of walking into a wall. So I adapted. I became the kind of woman who read the temperature of a room before speaking. I learned to swallow half my sentences before they left my lips. I fixed things before anyone noticed they were broken. Not just the sink or the boys' loose shoelaces, but the moods, the tension, the undercurrents in the house. That night, as I loaded the dishwasher, a dull ache settled in my ribs. I paused, hand on the open silverware drawer. Not sharp pain, exactly. More like pressure. Like someone had stacked books on my chest. I pressed 2 fingers into my side. It didn't help. I told myself it was probably indigestion. Or gas. Maybe I hadn't chewed properly. Maybe I'd skipped lunch again. I ran through the list in my head, as I always did. Find the most logical explanation. Rule out the scary ones. I didn't mention it to Tom. He wouldn't hear me anyway. And even if he did, he'd probably say something like, "Go lie down. You always overthink things." I could already hear it in his voice. That tone men use when they think you're being dramatic. When you're not even being anything. I pulled the dishwasher closed, wiped my hands on my jeans, and went to the living room doorway. "I'm gonna head up," I said quietly. Tom didn't look away from the TV. "Okay." I waited a second longer than I should have. I don't know what I was hoping for. A follow-up? You okay? Maybe even a glance. Nothing. So I went upstairs. I walked past the twins' room, cracked the door. They were curled up together in one bed, even though they each had their own. Jackson always claimed Landon kicked in his sleep, but most nights I'd find them tangled like puppies. They'd made me a card earlier that day. Crayons on construction paper. "You're the best mom in the whole world." It was taped to the fridge now. I watched them for a moment, heart tugging. This is why I kept quiet. Why I stayed. They deserved a stable home, even if that meant I had to hold my breath most days. Downstairs, a plate clattered in the sink. I flinched. Tom never rinsed his dishes. I turned toward the stairs, halfway back down when I heard his voice. Flat, annoyed. "Don't make a scene." I stopped. There was no scene. I hadn't said a word. I stood there, hand on the banister, stomach cold. It wasn't even what he said. It was how easily it slipped out, like a warning, like a rule I'd forgotten. I walked back to the bedroom, slow and careful. That phrase curled around my brain like barbed wire. Don't make a scene. I sat on the edge of the bed. The pressure in my ribs hadn't gone away. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, waiting for it to pass. It didn't. Instead, a different ache took hold, one I knew too well. The one where you realize you're disappearing in your own house. That everything you do, every choice to stay quiet, to stay calm, isn't making things better. Just quieter. I lay down, pulled the covers up, stared at the ceiling. Tom came in a little later, turned off the light without a word. The room filled with his breathing. Everyone was here, physically, but something had already slipped out the door and didn't come back. That was the night I believed staying quiet would keep us safe. I lay there, listening to the rhythm of Tom's breathing, counting it the way I used to count the boys' breaths when they were newborns. In, out, steady. As long as it stayed even, I told myself nothing bad could happen. Fear hovered at the edge of my thoughts, but I pushed it down the same way I always did. People didn't leave when things were hard. They stayed. That was what grown-ups did. That was what marriage meant. After a while, Tom shifted beside me. The mattress dipped as he rolled onto his side, facing away. I turned my head just enough to see the outline of his shoulder in the dark. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, almost careful. The question startled me. It sounded like concern. Or maybe I wanted it to. "I'm fine," I said. My words came out soft, automatic. There was a pause. Then he reached back, his hand brushing my arm. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't tender. But it was contact. And that was enough to make my chest loosen a little. "Things are just a lot right now," he said. "But we'll be okay." We'll be okay. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't an explanation. It was just a sentence. But I held on to it like something solid. I didn't ask what "a lot" meant. I didn't ask what he was dealing with, or why he felt so far away lately. I had learned that details could turn dangerous fast. Tone mattered more than truth. I nodded in the dark. Okay. Believing him hurt less than doubting him. Doubt opened doors I wasn't ready to walk through. The ache in my side returned, stronger this time. I turned onto my back and stared at the ceiling, breathing shallow so it wouldn't spike. I told myself it was temporary. A bug. Exhaustion. Something that would pass once life slowed down. I'd make an appointment after the weekend. No need to scare anyone yet, especially not the boys. Earlier that evening, when Jackson asked why I kept sitting down during dinner, I'd smiled and said I was just tired. Landon had watched me closely, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He always noticed things before his brother did. I made sure to laugh after that, just once, so he'd relax. Now, in the bedroom, I shifted carefully and eased myself upright. I needed water. Or maybe just a moment to prove I could still move without falling apart. My feet touched the floor, cold against my soles. I padded across the room, flicked on the small lamp near the dresser. That's when I saw it. A suitcase stood upright near Tom's side of the bed. Dark blue, the big one we used for long trips. The zipper was closed. A jacket was draped over the handle like it belonged there. I stared at it longer than I meant to. My first thought wasn't panic. It was confusion. Maybe he was packing for work. Maybe he'd mentioned a trip and I'd forgotten. My memory hadn't been great lately. That happened when you were tired, when you worried too much. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I was good at that. I'd built a whole life around explaining things away. I reached for the water glass on the nightstand, took a sip. My hand shook slightly. I set it down before Tom could notice. "What's that for?" I asked, keeping my voice level. He didn't turn around. "Just getting organized," he said. "Don't start." There it was again. That edge. The warning. The boys' room was down the hall. Their door was open a crack, a sliver of nightlight spilling onto the carpet. That glow kept me quiet. It always did. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I told myself it wasn't worth pressing. Morning would come. Things always looked different in daylight. I turned off the lamp, slid back under the covers, careful not to brush against the suitcase as I lay down. My heart thudded too loud in my ears. I forced my breathing to slow. This was what being reasonable looked like, I told myself. Waiting, giving space, trusting the promise. In the dark, with the house holding its breath around us, I chose not to ask another question. I went to bed believing the suitcase meant nothing, but the lie I told myself didn't survive the sunrise. By the time the sun slipped past the curtains the next morning, Tom was already gone. No note, no sound, just the smell of his aftershave lingering near the doorway and the dent his body had left on the mattress. I sat up slowly, every joint in my body resisting the motion. There was a tight pull behind my ribs again, like someone had cinched a belt too tight and forgotten to loosen it. Downstairs, I could hear the boys whispering, cabinets opening and closing, the clink of dishes. It took more effort than I cared to admit, but I made it to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and braced myself against the sink. My reflection didn't look right. Pale, drawn, lips pressed so tightly they barely looked like mine. But I smoothed my hair, changed into a fresh top, and went downstairs like nothing in the world was off. Because that's what I'd always done. I stuck to the routine. I kept things from breaking wide open. In the kitchen, Landon was carefully pouring juice into 3 glasses. Jackson stood by the oven, peering in through the fogged glass door. Something about the way they moved, deliberate, focused, made my throat close up. "Morning, Mama," Landon said without turning. Jackson added, "Don't come in yet. It's a surprise." I stood at the edge of the doorway, too tired to push. Okay. They were still in their pajamas, their hair messy and sticking up in strange directions, but the seriousness in their small faces made them look older, like they were trying to take care of something bigger than breakfast. I leaned against the wall, one hand resting on my side. The pressure was worse than the day before, and it took effort to breathe past it. But I stayed still, watched them work. It wasn't perfect, of course. The eggs were lopsided, the toast was already cooling on mismatched plates. But they were proud. Landon even folded paper napkins and set them like it was a restaurant. Jackson pulled the dish from the oven with my old mitts and said, "You're not allowed to clean anything up today. You just sit." And so I did. They sat on either side of me at the kitchen table, eating their food too fast, watching me like they were waiting for a reaction. I smiled. I thanked them. I told them it was the best breakfast I'd ever had, which wasn't a lie. If we could just sit at the table, I thought, maybe we could still be a family. I heard the front door open just as I reached for my glass of juice. Tom walked in. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask about the boys' breakfast or why I looked like I hadn't slept. He just tossed his keys on the counter, walked past us, and went into the pantry. The boys fell silent. Jackson lowered his fork. Landon looked at me. "Hey, Dad," Landon offered. Tom came back out holding a bottle of water and a granola bar. "You didn't need to make all this," he said, motioning vaguely at the table. "You know we're not doing the big family meal thing tonight." I blinked. They wanted to cook. It's not a big... He cut me off with a sharp sigh. "I said I wasn't staying late." My stomach dropped. "Where are you going?" I asked before I could stop myself. His jaw flexed. "Don't start." That was his favorite phrase lately. Not, "Let's talk." Not, "It's not what you think." Just, "Don't start." I started, but the words caught. Without warning, he turned toward the table and, with the side of his boot, kicked one of the legs. The dishes clattered, the pans skidded, juice spilled, plates tipped and crashed. The boys jerked back in their seats, startled. I didn't move. No one screamed, no one cried. We just sat there, in the mess, like statues. And then, he laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't manic. Just a short chuckle, like he'd seen something mildly amusing. Like this, us, was a joke he'd heard 1,000 times before. "That's what you get for playing house," he muttered, and walked out of the room. The front door opened again, then closed. The house swallowed the sound. The boys didn't look at me. I didn't look at them. There was scrambled egg on the floor, a fork under the table, a piece of toast, still whole, flipped upside down in the middle of the mess. I picked up a napkin and started wiping the juice from the table, slow and silent. Landon stood. Jackson followed. No one said a word. No one tried to stop him. That was the part that hurt the most. His absence didn't feel like a shock. It felt like something we'd all been preparing for, in our own quiet ways. I wanted to yell. I wanted to tell them none of this was their fault. But instead, I wiped and cleaned and said nothing. Because if I cried, if I broke down, then this became my fault. My son's voice didn't waver. It was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. "I'll never forgive you." He didn't shout it. He didn't cry. He just said it, eyes locked on his father, as if he were reading a sentence from a book he'd already memorized. And still, I couldn't speak. I stood frozen, my hands clenched at my sides, barely able to breathe. The weight of everything, the silence, the spilled dinner, the laughter that shouldn't have come, was pressing in, thick and suffocating. My husband stared at him for a moment, and then, just like that, he scoffed. A short breath through his nose, a shake of his head like our child's pain was ridiculous. His lips curled into that smirk I had started to hate, and he muttered, "Jesus, dramatic, aren't you?" I saw the flicker in my son's face, the way his jaw tightened, how he blinked just once to swallow it down. He didn't answer. He just looked away, like he knew talking to that man wouldn't change a thing. And God help me, I still stood there, silent, rooted. Then came the sound I think I'll never forget. The soft scrape of a suitcase being dragged across the hardwood floor. He walked down the hallway like he'd done it 100 times before. No stumbling, no second thoughts. Just a jacket grabbed from the hook, keys snatched from the bowl, and shoes already tied. He didn't glance back. He didn't ask if the kids were okay. He didn't say goodbye. There was nothing in his eyes when he opened the front door. Just a man who'd made up his mind long before this night. Maybe long before the kids were even born. Cold air slipped into the living room, biting at our skin, making the silence feel sharper. My body was screaming from the inside, every muscle, every nerve flaring in protest, but nothing showed on my face. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask him to stay. Because some part of me already knew he was gone, long before he left. The door closed behind him with the same soft thud it always made. But tonight, it echoed. It was the sound of something ending. And what stayed behind wasn't just silence. It was absence. The kind you can feel. The kind you can't fill. The kids didn't move. I could feel their eyes watching me, waiting for me to say something, to do something. But what was there to say? That it would be okay? That we were still a family? I didn't have it in me to lie. Not to them. Not anymore. So I bent down slowly, not to clean up the food on the floor, not yet, but to meet their eyes. I touched each of their faces gently. Their cheeks were cold. Their little bodies were still in shock. "He's not coming back, is he?" my younger son asked, his voice so small I almost didn't hear it. I opened my mouth and then closed it again. There was no answer that wouldn't break something more. "He made his choice," I said finally. "And we'll be okay. Not right now, but later." And that was all I had. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have money set aside for this. I didn't know how to fill the fridge on my own or pay for their shoes when they grew again next month. But I had my children. And I had this one night, and this one truth. He left, and he didn't look back. I sat on the couch once the kids were asleep, the TV playing something I couldn't follow. The lights were off except for one lamp near the hallway. The quiet was thick, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something has snapped. I thought about everything I hadn't said. Every time I held back, thinking it would keep us together. Every apology I swallowed, every smile I forced, every time I lowered my voice and shrank myself just so he wouldn't get annoyed. None of it kept him. None of it mattered. And in that moment, I didn't feel regret. I felt something else, something harder, colder, more exact. Resolve. That night, I understood I had been left to survive, not to be saved. You'd think the hardest part would have been the night he left, but that was easy compared to the days after. Because when someone walks out, there's at least something clear, something final. It's the days that follow, the long stretch of what now that wear you down. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel strong. I felt present. Awake before the sun, moving because I had to, not because I wanted to. I wasn't clinging to meaning or some grand story about resilience. I was paying bills. I was folding laundry. I was counting pills in a plastic tray while trying not to scare the boys with how tired I looked. Survival is never dramatic. It's a checklist on the fridge. It's boiled potatoes and toast because that's what's cheap and keeps everyone full. It's knowing exactly how many days you have until the gas is shut off. and stretching that number like it's elastic. And yet, we kept going. There were hospital visits, quiet ones, nothing dramatic, no emergency sirens, just white walls and waiting rooms that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. I didn't tell anyone when my test results came back. I didn't want pity, and frankly, I didn't want to explain. I was tired of explaining. So I took the medications, I went to the appointments, and when I couldn't stand long enough to cook, the boys figured it out. They learned how to scramble eggs, how to set a timer, how to pack their lunches, and I hated that they had to, but I loved the way they did it anyway, without complaint, just quiet steps filling in where their father used to be. We didn't talk about him, not because I forbade it, they just didn't ask, and I didn't volunteer. That absence became a kind of wallpaper in our lives, always there, but no one looked too close. Still, I noticed how the boys changed. They stopped asking for things. They became careful with their words, with their needs. They checked on me more than any children should have to. One night, I found a list taped to the inside of their bedroom door titled, "Things to Help Mom." And I cried, for the first time in weeks. Not because I missed my husband, not even because of the exhaustion, but because my sons were learning too soon how to carry other people's pain. The seasons shifted without fanfare. Fall brought colder mornings. Then it was Christmas. Then it wasn't. We skipped the tree that first year. I said we'd do something small. We didn't. They didn't ask. No gifts from him arrived, no calls, no cards. 15 months passed like that. Then 3 years. And eventually, I stopped counting. I don't remember when exactly. I just remember realizing one day that I hadn't thought about him in a while. And that realization didn't come with guilt, just quiet. He never came back. And I stopped waiting. I stopped imagining he'd change, that one day he'd realize what he'd walked away from and show up at our door, broken and apologizing. That fantasy died quietly. I didn't bury it, I just stopped feeding it. Instead, I focused on what was here: homework, grocery lists, doctor visits. I took on part-time work when I was well enough. The boys grew, slowly but surely, taller than I ever imagined. And they smiled less often. But when they did, it was real. Some nights I'd lie in bed and wonder who I might have become if things had gone differently. If he had stayed. If he had chosen us. If I had demanded more, earlier. If I'd spoken up instead of swallowing every word. But I never stayed in those thoughts long, because they didn't change anything. They didn't fill the gas tank. They didn't put dinner on the table. They didn't heal what needed healing. I wasn't some phoenix rising from ashes. I was just a woman who kept going, who didn't fall apart, who didn't wait for someone to fix it. I survived, and that became enough. I didn't know then that silence would one day bring him back. But it did. 15 years had passed, quietly, not without effort, just without noise. There's a difference. The house I live in now isn't large, but it's mine. The kind of place where the coffee pot clicks on before sunrise and the hardwood creaks when the wind presses just right. It's modest, but stable. It's where the boys, now men, come to visit on Sundays with their own stories, their own lives. It smells of lemon oil and roast chicken, and occasionally old books no one's thrown out yet. I never remarried, never needed to. I'd built something steady, not flashy, not a second chance at romance, just peace. And for me, peace was worth more than anything I used to think I wanted. Then, that Tuesday afternoon, just as I was getting ready to walk out to check the mailbox, I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the porch, not quite brave enough to knock. His face had changed in all the ways time insists it must. More lines, more gray, shoulders that once carried arrogance now looked uncertain. The man who once took up too much space in every room now seemed smaller, not just in frame, in presence. I opened the door before he could raise his hand. I didn't invite him in. I didn't need to. He didn't say hello, just looked at me like someone trying to figure out if they still belonged in the place they'd abandoned. I waited. When he finally spoke, his voice was flatter than I remembered, like life had rubbed the shine off it. I didn't know where else to go. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a need disguised as vulnerability. I didn't flinch. I didn't rush to comfort. I watched him the way I used to watch bread in the oven, curious if it would rise or collapse. He shifted his weight, then asked if we could sit. I stepped aside just enough for him to follow, leading him to the dining table, the one I bought myself 2 years ago with cash from my first tax return as a self-employed bookkeeper. He didn't recognize it. He sat down without asking. I stayed standing. He started talking, not about the past, but about his present. A job gone. Health issues he danced around without naming. A lease that hadn't been renewed. Words like temporary and just until I get back on my feet. That's when I knew. He didn't come for forgiveness. He came for stability. Mine. He didn't come because he loved me. He came because I'd survived, and he hadn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a speech. I just listened. And in that stillness, I felt something shift. Not in him, but in me. Because for the first time in our entire history, I wasn't the one uncertain. I wasn't hoping for anything. I had no interest in fixing, or healing, or filling the silence with explanations. I owed him none. He kept glancing toward the hallway, like he expected to see the boys. He hadn't asked about them yet. I think he knew better than to assume access. They were at work, grown, independent, decent. They hadn't needed his name on a single form or check or phone call in over a decade. And they didn't need to be protected from him now, because they knew. He finally asked, "Can I stay? Just for a little while." I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, "This isn't a conversation about staying." He blinked. "What is it then?" "It's about who you became, and who we did." He didn't understand right away. I could see the confusion. The entitlement didn't disappear with the years. It just softened into expectation. I poured myself a glass of water, sat across from him, and made it clear. You can't step back into a life you chose to leave and expect it to pause in your absence. It didn't. He nodded like he got it, but he didn't, not fully. That's when the door opened. My youngest stepped in, now 25, with his sleeves rolled up and a tired smile he only saved for home. He froze when he saw his father, didn't speak. He looked at me, not at him. And that was all I needed. Later, once we were alone again, I laid it out plainly. I'm not turning you away, but you don't get to make the terms. He opened his mouth, probably to bargain, maybe to explain, but I held up my hand. No more stories, no more requests. If you want to be here at all, it'll be by my rules. You'll pay rent, you'll contribute, you'll respect what's been built without you. He didn't argue, but he didn't thank me either. That silence used to hurt. Now, it just confirmed what I already knew. He thought this was a conversation about help. I knew it was about power. The silence between us thickened after I set my conditions. He sat back in the chair, lips pressed together, eyes scanning the room like he was searching for a foothold in a house that no longer had room for him. I watched him shift again. His tone changed, not desperate now, but almost warm, rehearsed, as if he remembered he used to charm his way through hard moments, as if charm hadn't aged out of its usefulness. "You know," he said, voice softer, "I've had a lot of time to think." I waited. "I made mistakes," he continued, glancing toward the window like the view might save him from facing me. "I didn't handle things right. Back then." His fingers tapped gently against the edge of the table. It was a performance, controlled, thoughtful, careful not to trip into anything that sounded like real remorse. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He said, "It was complicated." He didn't say, "I hurt you." He said, "We were both under pressure." Each word circled around guilt like it was a puddle he didn't want to step in. This wasn't an apology, I thought. It was a test. He wanted to see if I'd nod, if I'd take the bait and offer comfort, if I'd give him what he came for without him having to earn it. I didn't flinch. I didn't lean forward. I just kept my posture quiet and still. "I know you've done well," he added. "Everyone's told me. The house, the boys. You've held it all together." That was the moment he tried shifting the weight again, from what he did to what people might think. He started talking about how people see families, about how it's important to show unity, especially with the boys grown now. They'd feel better seeing us sit down, even if it's just once. He said things like, "We don't need to rehash the past," and "Forgiveness shows strength." I'd heard those lines before, but not from him. I'd heard them whispered at church, at the grocery store, from neighbors who clutched their pearls while excusing the men they loved. It was all too familiar. A pretty frame around a broken picture. And then he said it. "You're a woman. You know what I mean. We carry more. That's just a woman's fate." That sentence settled between us like smoke from a fire I thought I'd already put out. He said it like it was truth, like it was something handed down, not something shoved onto us by men like him. I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. I let him think he'd said something wise. What he didn't know, what he would never understand, was that I had proof. Not just memories, documents, notes, records. I kept them. The bills he left unpaid, the letters from women I'd never met, the receipt from the hotel he stayed at the week I was in the hospital. There was no drifting. He hadn't slipped away. He'd walked out with a plan. And I had the paper trail. So no, I didn't respond. I didn't tell him what I knew. Not yet. I let the air between us stay heavy. Let him think he was guiding this conversation. Let him believe his almost apology had softened me. Because this time, silence was my strategy, not my surrender. I watched as he leaned back, thinking he'd made progress. He smiled, just a little. A practiced smile, like he was sealing a deal. And I thought to myself, he still doesn't know what it means to pay for something he broke. Evening crept in while we sat there. The sun dipped behind the trees and cast long shadows across the floor. I got up to turn on the porch light. When I came back, he was still talking, still trying to build a bridge with boards he'd burned. But I'd already crossed over, years ago. He didn't notice the shift in my face. He didn't see the wall he'd built inside me every time he laughed while I cried, every time he twisted my words to make himself the victim, every time he told me that suffering quietly was just part of being a wife. He thought he was close to something, rebuilding, reconnecting, maybe even redemption. But I was watching him with clear eyes now, and I knew without a shadow of doubt, he would never say the words I needed to hear, because he didn't believe he owed them. That was when he decided to force the outcome. He leaned forward just enough to close the space between us. His tone was still coded in civility, but something underneath had shifted, like a hand that looks like it's offering help until you realize it's pushing you into a corner. "I'm not trying to pressure you," he started, which was exactly what people say when they're about to do just that. "But I can't wait forever. I have to make plans." Plans. That word carried weight in his mouth. It was his new angle, pressure disguised as practicality. He sat up straighter, squaring his shoulders like a man preparing for negotiation. "I'm just saying, if we can come to an agreement, it would help both of us. You won't have to do anything drastic. Just let me stay. Temporarily." His eyes searched mine, waiting for a flinch, a softening, any sign that I'd bend. I didn't blink. He continued, voice gentler now, but clipped. "You don't have to forgive me. I get that. But this isn't about the past. This is about now." Then came the deeper push. "I have nowhere else to go. You know that, right? And the kids, well, they'll understand. Eventually." The implication was clear. If I didn't agree, I'd be the reason their father had no place to sleep. I'd be the villain again. I stood still, feeling the old shame knocking on the door of my chest, familiar, unwanted. But I didn't open it. He thought invoking urgency would push me, that the clock ticking would tilt the balance in his favor. What he didn't understand was this. I no longer feared time. "I'll let you stay," I said slowly. "For 1 week. No discussions about the past. No assumptions about the future. This is help, not forgiveness. And it ends on my terms." His jaw clenched, but he nodded, forcing a smile like it hadn't just stung him. "Of course. Whatever works for you." But his eyes gave it away. He hadn't expected me to say yes. Not like that. Not with conditions. The moment hung in the air like cold smoke. He was in the house, yes, but not in control. I saw it settle over him. This wasn't the home he left. The center of this place wasn't him anymore. It was me. He glanced around, maybe trying to find a place to set down his coat, maybe trying to find his old footing. But it was gone. The house no longer shifted to his mood. The boys, now men, no longer looked to him for cues. That power, that center of gravity, was mine now. He sat on the edge of the armchair, clearly uncomfortable, like a guest overstaying his welcome before the welcome had even been offered. "I appreciate it," he said, finally. "You didn't have to." "You're right," I cut in, voice even. "I didn't." We both knew the rules had changed. There was a long silence, broken only by the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the quiet creak of the floor when I walked past him. I made tea. I didn't offer him any. He didn't ask. By the time the boys got home, the sky outside had darkened fully. They greeted me, saw him, and said nothing. Their eyes flicked to me, not him, for the pulse of the room. And when I nodded, they relaxed, just slightly, enough to show me they saw it too. He wasn't in charge anymore. He must have felt it, that shift, because his next words came faster, clumsier. "I didn't mean to make things complicated for you. I'm trying to fix what I can, you know?" Fix. He still thought this was about repair, as if time erased choices. He shifted in the chair. "The boys, they deserve something better than this. Coldness." Now it was my turn to sit. "I kept them warm," I said plainly. "When you left, I didn't let them freeze." He looked like he wanted to argue, maybe even raise his voice, but he didn't. He knew yelling wouldn't work here. Not anymore. So he tried guilt. Maybe I deserve to be punished. But do they? Do you want them to grow up thinking people can't change? They're already grown, I said, and they've learned plenty from watching you leave. He looked at me like he wanted to say something sharp, something final, but the words got caught in his throat. Whatever power he thought he could regain was slipping, fast. He'd spent so long being the center of the story, he didn't know how to handle being a footnote. And then, for the first time, he looked like he might break. He leaned forward again. I made mistakes, he said, voice low. But I'm still their father. That has to count for something. I finished my tea.
Let the silence grow long enough for the statement to fall flat between us. Being a father isn't just a title, I said. It's a role you left behind. They filled that gap without you. He stood suddenly, hands clenched. So that's it? You're just done with me? I didn't move. No, I was done with you 15 years ago. His chest rose and fell, his mouth half open like he was about to fight, but nothing came out. He realized the door hadn't closed on him. He had walked out of it, and now he was asking to re-enter a house that no longer belonged to the man who left. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply stood up, walked to the kitchen, and turned off the light. That was the end of the conversation. Or at least, I thought it was. I thought that would be the end. I was wrong. He left the house 2 days later, just after dawn, with a duffel bag that looked older than I remembered. He didn't say goodbye to the boys, didn't leave a note, just slipped out like fog burning off in the morning sun. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful, but it wasn't painful either. It was space, plain and blank. Not silence like before, when the air was tight with unsaid things. This was different. It felt clean, unfilled. The days stretched long and uneventful. I folded towels, paid bills, cooked small meals that didn't need to stretch. The boys, now men, came and went, each respectful of the stillness in the house. No one mentioned him, not directly. But I caught one of them staring out the kitchen window longer than made sense. Weeks passed like this. The rhythm settled back into something familiar, but not quite the same. I'd expected a final explosion, a dramatic end. What I got instead was a slow exhale. Then, one afternoon, as I was sorting laundry on the couch, my youngest sat across from me, holding an old photograph. It was one of those pictures you keep but don't display, creased at the edges, too full of ghosts. He didn't say much, just, I remember this day. I looked up. He tapped the corner of the photo where a little boy in a red shirt clung to my leg. You had just burned your hand on the oven rack, but you still made us lunch. He didn't say it with drama. It wasn't a moment of confrontation or pity, just a fact, remembered clearly. I hadn't thought they noticed. Back then, I thought I'd done a better job hiding the hurt. But they saw. That memory landed softly, and yet it shifted something deep in me. It told me the truth hadn't disappeared. It had just been carried forward, tucked into the corners of their minds, waiting to surface when they were ready. A few days later, I ran into an old neighbor at the grocery store. One of those well-meaning types who always says too much. She leaned in, whispered, I heard he's back. Must be nice having the family whole again. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct her. I just smiled in a way that let her keep her version of things. There's a kind of strength in letting others be wrong about you. I've learned that. I used to want the truth shouted from rooftops, my version, the full story.
But over time, I realized justice doesn't always wear a ribbon. Sometimes it just means knowing your own story and refusing to let it be rewritten by people who weren't there. So I let her believe what she needed to. Later that week, the boys came over for dinner, both of them at the same time, which was rare now. They helped set the table just like they used to. No one said it out loud, but we all remembered the last time we'd done this, before he returned, before he tried to reinsert himself. This meal was different. No big announcements, no heavy talk. Just 3 people passing bowls, refilling glasses, laughing at a joke I didn't even catch the beginning of. The air felt warm, not forced, the kind of warmth you don't notice until someone tries to steal it. I looked around the table and felt something settle in me. Not pride, not triumph, just steadiness. We had held. We had lasted. That night, after the dishes were put away and the house was quiet again, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. I didn't cry. I didn't even think much. I just let the moment be. I thought about all we'd lost, not just years, but versions of ourselves, plans, certainties, time we couldn't get back. But I also thought about what remained. My sons, my name, my voice. He hadn't taken those, and he couldn't. For a long time, I believed survival was a lesser prize, that if you didn't win in a way others could see, it didn't count. But now I understand. Survival isn't the opposite of defeat. It's the proof you were never truly broken. We didn't get justice the way stories promise. We got something harder. We survived.